One. Just hours before the meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, unpredictability is the name of the game. And my next guest wrote about 7 possible scenarios. He refers to the first one as CVID, short for complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament or bust. Then there is art of the deal. The third is truthful hyperbole, making the most of the outcome, even if it is not a major breakthrough. Number 4, best friends forever. The 5th one, we've got ours. Next on the list, good enough to keep the ball in play. And finally, a major breakthrough. Bruce Klingner, senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a former CIA deputy division chief for Korea, put that all together for us. And I read that, Bruce, and it really made a lot of sense to me. How do you think that it'll all turn out after the coverage you've seen today?
Well, first of all, it's nice to know that someone reads the papers I publish, so I appreciate that. I think it'll probably be a combination, perhaps, of a couple. Early on, we thought it might be the CVID or bust, sort of what the National Security Advisor Bolton was pushing. If we don't get an immediate embrace by North Korea of CVID, then the meeting is short and we walk. The president seems to be walking away from that, I think, towards what will be a combination of best friends forever, and a bit of a truthful hyperbole. He's been downplaying expectations for a breakthrough success, saying that it's the beginning of a process and that it's a meet and greet or it's a get-to-know-you summit with Kim Jong-un. So if they establish a good relationship, that's sufficient to call it a success. I think there will be a bit of truthful hyperbole, sort of overhyping it, as administrations often do. But it'll perhaps be enough of a success that it justifies follow-on meetings and negotiations.
Bruce, in their first meeting, President Obama told President Trump, North Korea will be your toughest issue to deal with. And Susan Rice, the former national security advisor, had this to say earlier.
It's going to take quite a while. This is a very complicated set of issues. And success can't be declared on the basis of a happy meeting. I think that the critical thing from the North Korean point of view was to be able to come to the negotiating table when they did come, with having demonstrated to the world that their nuclear capacity and their missile capacity has been perfected.
And Bruce, you wrote also that Trump must push hard enough to get real concessions, but not so hard that the diplomatic process breaks down entirely. More thoughts on that?
Right. Well, it really is a bit of a Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. You know, and as the president said in April, it would be easy to just call it a success, but he wants to get the nuclear weapons. So I think we need to hold him to that standard. Now, since then, he has been lowering expectations, watering down some of the U.S. policies. I think that was driven by some statements by North Korea in May. And if you set aside the insulting and the threatening ones, the most important was one where a senior official really just reiterated what had been long-standing North Korean policy on denuclearization, which was quite different from what the White House thought it was. So they realized that there was a bigger gap between the two countries.
Bruce, I wanted to ask you, you had such expertise, and you were there in 1996 to 2001, following Korea. Can you tell me a little bit about how different Kim Jong-un is from his father?
Well, I think he's applying his father's playbook in a more effective way. North Korea has long been pursuing nuclear weapons since the 1960s, actually. And what Kim Jong-il, the father, had was what I would call a 2-page playbook. One page is threats, provocations, attacks. The other was charm offensive, but with North Korea, it tends to be more offensive than charming. And Kim Jong-un, up until January of this year, was only doing the first page, the very rapid trying to complete their nuclear and missile programs across a spectrum of different programs. And he wasn't doing any of the charm offensives, but just very rapid testing systems. Now what he's done is turn to the diplomacy aspect and going really diplomacy on steroids compared to his father. So I think he's more effective in the public relations aspect, but it's still really the same game plan.
And then if you could just tell me a little bit about how you think China is looking at this summit today.
Well, China has been trying to get the U.S. and South Korea into discussions or negotiations with North Korea. They're not pleased with what North Korea is doing. They don't like a raising of tensions, but they've always been very reluctant to increase pressure on North Korea, including the required sanctions enforcement from the UN resolutions. So they were quite nervous about the talk earlier this year about a potential U.S. preventive attack on the North. So they would see this as a positive development, walking away from, seemingly brink of war to negotiations.
The last question I have for you is, I'm curious about when you studied Korea and you were so involved as the deputy director of the Korea desk at the CIA, is there something that you always wanted to know about the Hermit Kingdom that we have since learned, or is there still some mysteries out there that you would like to know?
There are many, many mysteries. When I shifted from the Soviet Union to work over on North Korea, I was amazed at how much less we knew about North Korea compared to the Soviet Union. We called it the hardest of the hard targets because each of the intelligence sources has more difficulty with North Korea than the Soviet Union or other countries. So we have, I think, a good handle on the military capabilities, but leadership intentions is still an area that we're really grabbing for.
Well, I guess we're going to learn a lot more in about 6 hours when the president finally sits down with him. Bruce Klingner, thank you so much.